Order, order. Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee on Monday the 2nd of March 2026. And I'm pleased to say today that we are looking at a success story, the Bank of England's real-time gross settlement system, RTGS. This system is a critical part of the UK's payment infrastructure, providing settlement services for sterling payments in the UK worth around £790 billion a day. In 2016, the bank announced its intention to modernise the RTGS in order to respond to changes in the payments landscape, promote innovation and competition, and enhance the system's resilience and capability. In April 25, the bank successfully launched the new RTGS at a cost of £431 million, achieving its aim of implementing the new modernised RTGS system. The bank's approach to Renewal addressed many common problems the NAO has identified in public sector digital programmes. So today, we'll be looking to identify the key success factors in working with commercial partners that enabled the bank to deliver the RTGS Renewal programme. We will also be examining the government's arrangements, accountability and culture that enabled the success of the programme, and seek assurance from the bank that it is applying lessons learned from the Renewal programme to its other transformation and modernisation programmes. So today we have firstly Sir David Ramsden. Sir David, would you like to introduce yourself for the record, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm Dave Ramsden. I'm Deputy Governor for Markets, Banking, Payments and Resolution, and I had Governor-level responsibility for the RTGS Renewal programme from September 2017 when I joined the bank through to the delivery in April 2025.
And I see you're styled as Dave, so you're happy for us to call you Dave
Yes.
rather than David. Thank you very much. Victoria, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Victoria Cleland. I'm the Chief Cashier and Special Advisor to the Governor at the bank. I was the business sponsor for the RTGS Renewal programme from June 2018 until the very end of last year, and that included running the programme but also the live teams responsible for the system.
Thank you very much. You had the decision of go or no go.
The ultimate one was Nathan and myself, yes.
Very good. Nathan, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Chair, my name is Nathan Monk. I'm the Executive Director for Technology and the Chief Information Officer at the Bank of England.
You're all very welcome. Is it your first time, all three of you, to the committee?
Yeah, I've been a public servant for 40 years, but this is my first time at the PAC.
Well, I welcome, a special welcome to all of you. I hope you will find the process interesting, if not enjoyable. So, to start us off today, we are very pleased to have my deputy, Clive Betts. No, it's not, it's Catherine McKinnell. I'm so sorry. You've got heebie-jeebies before I started. So to start us all, Catherine, please.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, thank you all for being here today. And I have to say it's quite unusual for this committee to be looking at a success story and to try and extrapolate from that why. But also, as ever, there will be challenge as to how we can do it even better in future, right across government, where we know there is much digital renewal that needs to happen. So just going back to the very beginning of your process, this is probably a question for you, Victoria. The very early work that was undertaken to establish what would be needed within the programme to contribute to its overall success. Obviously, I'm happy for anyone to answer. What were the very early factors and steps that were taken that you think contributed to it being a success in the end?
I think the most important thing was deciding what exactly do we want to achieve. So what was our vision for the new system? We knew from the very start that resilience was going to be at the heart of what we were doing. This is a piece of critical national infrastructure. It is a payment system, there's a load of plumbing, but ultimately it is the thing that enables money to move around the country. It is key to all of your constituents if they're trying to move house. Ultimately, all payments go across it. So we knew this was a piece of critical national infrastructure. If we were going to change it, we wanted to make sure we got the best from what we were doing. So we were focusing on resilience, but also thinking, what more can we do? So from the very start, we were thinking about competition and innovation. And I think having that clarity from the very start in terms of these are the end objectives was key. We then split that down into sort of 5 key areas around resilience, access, interoperability, end-to-end risk
management,
that's the one, and also just thinking about what the best we do for users. And we had that from the start, and it wasn't just what is the bank's view of this. We went and spoke to industry. I think one of the key parts of success in understanding what industry wanted, to create a blueprint, which was then the golden thread through everything else we did in requirements. What's that end game in terms of what we build, but also how we run it? I think sometimes it can be quite easy that you think the end goal is to build something. What we constantly said, it isn't just going live, it is staying live that was important, and thinking across the whole range of stakeholders there. So having that blueprint, making some big decisions early on, to buy, to build, are there any particular red lines, talking with sort of key experts, for example, the National Cybersecurity Centre, in terms of getting their advice, critical national infrastructure, what do we need to consider there. So really, who are our stakeholders, what do we want to do, and taking time to stop and make sure we understood that vision, to talk to people who are running the current system, who are likely to run the future one, so that we were sort of feeding in their needs, not just what we thought we wanted. And I think that was, to my mind, key. It was sometimes a little daunting saying, well, we've been going for a few months and we're still working on those requirements, but actually getting the requirements right at the start was key.
And if I can just add to that, from coming into the Bank of England as I did in September 2017, I had no background in tech projects. I'd only delivered policy projects at the Treasury. And it was very clear that for me, coming in as Deputy Governor, I needed to have a team of people who knew what they were doing. You know, we were talking earlier about Nathan and Victoria making the final decision. We were always, I could sort of help support the governance, chair the relevant committees, drive the strategy, keep the other governors and courts cited, but always being clear about, you know, particularly for the Bank of England, because in 2014, as the excellent reports from the NAO sets out, we'd had a major outage of RTGS. I think probably on that day, we this was before my time, but the court commissioned an independent report from Deloitte to look into what had gone wrong. And that was really what framed many of the requirements, particularly resilience, that Victoria was just emphasising. Because the reason that one of the key reasons for that outage was, and you know, like I think 700 mortgage payers were delayed a day in being able to take out their mortgages, so they couldn't complete. And that was because the system we had before was reliable, but was completely, well, it was very difficult to change. It could go in a straight line, but it couldn't really adapt to the new requirements of the sort of 21st century settlement system with payment systems interacting in it. And so, if you like, the blueprint that Victoria set out that we published in May 2017, and which I was basically one of my 5 priorities in my time as a Deputy Governor, it was always in the top 5, was to deliver on that blueprint, was reflecting the challenges we'd had. So, you know, back to your point, you know, there are challenges, and the bank had challenges with previous things it had tried to do. And we learnt from those lessons, I think. There were ups and downs along the way, but you know, we got there in the end.
So, I mean, the overall message I'm taking from that is clear vision as like an overarching, which seems to have come out very strong in your response there. And you've mentioned the things that you want to achieve. Resilience, you've mentioned a number of times, competition and innovation. So just coming to the procurement process, what do you think was it about your procurement process in terms of its earlier stages that resulted in you getting the results you wanted out of it at the end of that process?
Maybe I could just say a couple of words, and then Victoria and Nathan, who led on the detail of the procurement, will come in. I mean, the figure 2 in the report sets out a really helpful timeline for the programme and highlights how we first developed the procurement strategy during 2018, and this was during the planning, analysis and design phase. So back to what Victoria was emphasising, which I think the NAO's report recognises, we took our time through those early stages in working out how best to set ourselves up for success. And so we didn't actually embark on the procurement of the key partner, the technology delivery partner, until February 2019. And that procurement phase was such a foundational phase. I mean, actually, we didn't sign the contract until July 2020. So we were really trying to get the foundations, including on that procurement, in place. And I guess the key elements, though, were ensuring that we were an intelligent customer, that we knew what we wanted. And actually, one thing that helped us in that was that we, very early on in my term as Deputy Governor, we took on running the high-value payments scheme for the UK, the CHAPS system. So we knew what we needed from if you like, the high-value, low quantity, low turnover scheme, as opposed to the retail schemes. So we were an intelligent customer. We had this competed design exercise approach. And then we really worked carefully with all the potential partners through that phase to make sure that they were understanding our needs and we were understanding whether they had the capacity and the capability to deliver what we needed in what became an absolutely vital partnership.
Yeah. Just to add, I think we did a lot of pre-engagement as well before we went out to market. So we did a lot of briefing with potential suitors. So that made sure that they were really clear about what we wanted and vice versa as we kicked the process off. I think that was massively helpful. The competed design was actually a really good thing for us as well, because we knew the kind of high-level blueprint, as it were, but we wanted to go out and obviously get further clarity. We had some like mega minds from industry, if you like, that were competing. So we wanted to make sure that we could use the best of everyone's design. So part of the process was that we made sure that we could procure the IP of that process as well. So anything that was done in that process, we actually ended up kind of containing. So we were able, through the procurement, to actually go through a competed design process and come out at the end with a really good design at the back end of it, where we consulted with lots of other third parties as part of the process, which was really quite helpful actually. And we did some proof of concepts as well, which was really good. So we got to see the engineering capabilities firsthand as well. So there's one thing about talking and seeing slides. There's another thing about actually seeing engineers hands-on building code and etc. As part of the process, we also went through that as well, which I think was a really good thing to do.
I was just going to ask a slightly technical question. Were there any challenges that you encountered in taking that approach when it comes to sort of the regulation around procurement? And so, because getting that balance right between really open communication with anyone that may be competing for a project, so that you get the best out of that competition while making sure that it does comply with all the competition rules.
Well, there's obviously something in the back of our mind, obviously, to make sure we're always compliant. So that's obviously something that we took very seriously. It was something that we really did focus on quite a lot throughout the process. It was a consideration right the way through. Obviously, we had a lot of support. We had a dedicated procurement team working with us, which I actually think was really helpful as well, to kind of help make sure we're guiding us through the process as correctly as possible. But I think there's a combination of that balance, I think, and making sure we're doing the right thing, giving as much information, but being open and fair as we possibly can be throughout the process.
And I think I wouldn't say that the legislation and making sure we were sticking by all the rules turned out to be a constraint. I mean, it's obviously incredibly important as a public body that we're following all of those. But we did, back to being able to call on really good expert advice at every stage. We did have that advice, but even so, this was a big procurement. I mean, Victoria had done another very big procurement earlier in her previous role. I guess the one thing that it does come back to the point that it did, and rightly the report highlights, that we did end up taking a bit longer overall with the 4 replans, but also the procurement phase ended up taking probably a bit longer than we'd originally planned in the business case. It ended up taking a year and a half. But that, again, you're trading off okay, so we're going to have to assess this as we go along into the actual big stages of the programme to come. But this is still investment and time that we could also afford to make, because although the system didn't have great functionality, the existing system, it did work. So we could keep the show on the road with the existing RTGS. It did mean that we were back to what Victoria was saying about how we could provide this platform for future innovation, greater accessibility, greater competition. That was all going to take a bit longer, but that seemed to be a sensible trade-off to be making.
It's really interesting hearing about the procurement process, because it does sound like it was a very thorough process, and as you acknowledge, it took longer for that, but obviously the results speak for themselves. The other aspect, and as well as complying with all of the legal requirements, there are also the sort of security and commercial challenges around procurement. How did you manage to get the balance right in sort of driving what sounds like quite an innovative approach, whilst also maintaining all of those protections as well?
I mean, we worked very closely with the National Cybersecurity Centre from the start to really make sure we pinned down what some of those security angles would be. We set out some very clear guidance to potential bidders around using List X facilities. So if they were going to be part of this, they needed to be accredited. So we tried to be as open up front with the bidders in terms of this is where security will bite. We spent time understanding how we were going to exchange information. Certain information could only be read within the bank. We had a dedicated team with some procurement experts. We brought somebody in from another area of government who actually led the procurement. We had a separate piece of governance for procurement, which I think was helpful, because procurement does tend to have its own sort of timeline, so having people who could focus on that, but also making sure we were bringing in our own team to say, okay, if we were going to do this for security, is that going to make it impossible to run it? And always trying to think you can make a decision now, but what does that really mean for the operators? I think constantly challenging ourselves in that way, and having sort of decided to go for a sort of competitive dialogue approach. We'd done that deliberately, so we could have this discussion, and a number of times we did sort of say, gosh, do we need all of this sort of bureaucracy around the procurement? But I think the view we came to was actually it was a really helpful discipline to us to make sure that we were asking ourselves the right questions. I think there was a danger if you'd gone in too quickly, you'd have then had a whole load of questions to ask after the event and you hadn't priced them or anything.
Victoria, how important was the competed design process? You had 3 different people who were giving you advice on how this thing should work, and you actually even went as far as to pay the 2 unsuccessful bidders in that process. Yeah. So firstly, how did you choose them, and how important was it?
It was a really, and I'll let Nathan come in as well, because it was sort of the tech bit was certainly his world. We found it incredibly important to do that because we had an idea of what we wanted. We knew the vision. We wanted to sort of get some real experts to say, okay, can you turn this into reality? So they came up with some useful ideas that actually we then used for the end programme. So that was helping that. It could see how the teams work. We did, after a while, decide that we would incentivise all the 3 to compete the design, because we knew it was going to be a big effort for them, so we didn't want to put up such big barriers that enough people weren't going to come forward. The 3 were chosen through the procurement process to start with, so we'd followed initially and sort of opened up who would like to be part of this procurement, then we'd had the security checks and the PQQ, then we'd had another competition. So these were the ones who had gone through the normal procurement approach to get there. So those were the top 3 at that stage, and then we used the designs. But Nathan, do you want to come with a little more?
Yeah, we had very stringent kind of criteria that we put forward on the outset to make sure that we were obviously grading all the different suppliers' responses, and that's how we went from many to 5 to 3 to one, basically. So we took them through a very structured process, and we looked at all very different attributes, if you like, of what it should be around the kind of engagement that we've got with the partner, the technical solution they're putting forward, the team capability, the proof of concepts that they put forward. All of these different bits of criteria you then use to evaluate and then make a final decision. But we had some really credible people who were kind of companies that were putting forward really good technical solutions, and that's why we wanted to have the IP, as it were. We own the IP for the design, so we could use the best of breed, the best of all of the designs, and come up with the ultimate design at the end of the process.
Was it that process that enabled you to eventually sign a fixed price contract with Accenture?
Yes, yeah,
absolutely.
It's very unusual in a digital transformation program to have a fixed price contract.
Yeah, we had a lot. We had over nearly 2,000 requirements on the outset. We'd done a lot of work. Going back to the earlier point, we did a lot of work up front to make sure that we were really clear about what we wanted. So we had 2,000 requirements, functional, non-functional requirements that we'd already documented, which was really helpful in order to be our North Star as we went through this process as well. So that really helped us, I think, as well.
And if I can add on that, I mean, just in terms of how the high-level governance worked, the recommendations that were made from all were very, there was an awful lot of bottom-up detail with the marking of the final three, and then the relevant governance committee, as I recall, we had all the detail we needed to just go with the recommendation. I guess the other thing to say is, and this is more around the incentives that a fixed price contracts gives. I mean, we haven't got our partners Accenture here with us, but I think given what was happening in the settlements and payment space globally, there was also a lot of opportunity for them in partnering with us as an intelligent customer. So their incentives in terms of why might they be willing to go in for a fixed term contract? I mean, I can't speak for them, but certainly, and at this point we had a lot of help from Ron Khalifa, who had made his name in the private sector and was on the bank's court and was the non-exec chairing the governance committee we had at this time. But that sense that we were going to, we were working with a partner who would also benefit, but therefore would be, in terms of future business, if they did a good job, but would equally see therefore why they might want to be willing to do it at a fixed term price rather than keep being able to add things on, because we were obviously acutely conscious of our VFM responsibilities and not wanting to have just an endless list of things that we were going to have to come back and have to pay up for.
You presumably re-tendered at the second stage before you gave the tender to Accenture? We
didn't. It wasn't so much that we re-tendered. We had because we'd been through the invitation, the ITP, the invitation to participate in dialogue, and then the invitation to continue. I think it was there was never a re-tendering because it was the best and final offer stage. It was a single stage in February 2020, and that set out the whole parameters of the tender. When we did the replans, as we can come on to discuss, there was a bit of creative tension between us at times on who was going to pay for what when things did go outside the contract. But no, it was a single tender.
The competed design was just part of the full procurement process, which as we'd whittled down and got to 3 in the competed design, and then Accenture won the one to...
You'd already whittled it down to 3. There was no chance of any other people coming in at this phase.
No. We went 8 down to 5, down to 3, down to 1.
Very good. Thank you. Well, thank you. Very helpful answers. Clive Betts, please.
Yes. Going on to the issue of collaborative working, which is absolutely key to what you were doing. Did you set out saying we want to have a partner who can work with us on this basis, and therefore you looked for one and Accenture came through? Or did you actually get them as your partner and then decide you could actually work closely with them on that basis?
Can I just something very briefly on... I think right from the outset, when we made the big foundational decision we made that we had to make through 2018 was that we were going to build the core settlement engine ourselves rather than buy it in. And this comes back to Victoria's emphasis on cyber. We had looked at the kind of products that we might be able to use, and we made a strategic decision that none of them were going to be appropriate. And for some of the bank's other operations, they're not critical national infrastructure, but we have bought in solutions. But on this one, we realised that for the core settlement engine and the ledger, we needed to build it. But equally, although the bank, we're very significant. We've got at the moment 5,500 staff. We've got a very significant technology function that Nathan leads. We didn't have the capability. We didn't have the in-house capability, nor were we going to be able to pick it up, to grow it, to actually do all the work to build this thing and then add to it all the other components that we could buy in, which were less critical. So I think that was the kind of framing for thinking right from the start, we had to have an effective partnership. So we didn't sort of think, back to your question, Mr. Betts, it wasn't that we thought, oh, well, this is our vision, this is how we're going to do it, and let's see if we can do it ourselves and then we'll partner. We knew that that it was going to be a partnership model from the outset. Sorry.
Yeah, no, we thought that partnership was going to be absolutely key. Some of the, as Dave said, some of the underlying infrastructure we were going to build, some of it we needed them to build. So that sort of trust and understanding was incredibly important. We had started thinking about what is the best way to join the teams together and thinking about sort of town halls and things. Unfortunately, by the time we signed the contract, we were in the heart of lockdown. So some of the events that we planned to bring the teams together didn't work. We managed to do a lot on Teams, but sort of had a sort of partnership charter to try and talk through things such as what culture do we want, where can we have sort of co-located working, involving Accenture in sort of our governance, because we wanted to understand how we could create things together. We wanted to have full visibility from either side in terms of where things were and weren't working so well, so we could kind of use their brain power to solve those. And I think one of the things you'll probably hear us talk about quite a lot this afternoon is about transparency and no surprises, which was key to our own internal governance, but was absolutely key to that partnership with Accenture. And so one of the things that we did from quite clear at the start was saying, this is one team. We are joining Accenture, bank technology, bank operators, bank programme people, and we need to think of ourselves as one. You can't have a rift between all that. So when we were thinking about sort of awarding the tender, that was one of the things that was coming out in the sort of various questions. We needed people we could work with.
What's the essential... Oh, so Nathan wants to...
I'll just add a little bit as well. So just, I think for me, my reflection would be the collaborative kind of way of working as well. So whilst it's a fixed price contract, we're really keen to move to more of a agile way of working. So actually, rather than just commissioning someone to go off and build something for us and then come back in a couple of years and show us it, we wanted to see it, as Victoria was saying, we wanted to see it build together. So one of the first things we did, actually, Victoria and I, we moved our teams together to co-locate, so technology and the business together. And then also the partner came with us. I know there's the pandemic little challenge we were navigating at the start as well, but that was a very key part for the way in which we wanted to work together. We did a lot of upfront work about how we wanted to operate together and work together, which I think did help us quite a lot.
Just to explore then. So, well, essentially you looked at it and said, what can we do in-house? Mm-hmm. Well, we can't do that. We'll bring it in with our partner to do it.
Yeah.
But it was all, I mean, something I was very very cognizant of this in reading your hearing with Treasury and NS&I about the issues that they've been having, because this focus in your questions around and the challenges they'd had with the systems integrator, because integrating the system, although we had these different parts, was always central to, we knew, we weren't going to get buy-in someone else to do that. So in a sense, Accenture were on the hook for helping us with the core things like the core settlement engine and all of that, but also they had to provide that integration and deliver on that. And we had, we and they had challenges with that later on in terms of the testing, which explains some of what we had to do with replan 3 and 4. But it almost reinforced the partnership that they were so central to giving us an integrated technology solution at the end.
We did a lot around. Oh, sorry.
No, please.
We did a lot around that kind of racy model about who's accountable for what in what areas as well up front. So we wrote down, we would be taking the lead on these things. We expected the partner to be taking the lead on these things, which I think again gave us a good bedrock to kind of work on.
That was the question then I've got to follow up with is, it obviously went very well. Everything, you obviously had occasional differences that you managed to resolve. But if there had been any major dispute, how would you resolve that? I mean, would the system be robust enough to cope with something like that?
What the system, as we manage the programme? I mean, I think it would, because I think we did test it with the replans and these questions of going back to who had agreed to do what, who should pay for what. I mean, compared to some of the challenges that programmes faced, ours were maybe relatively minor, but I can remember being in situations where it was felt, because I don't have a commercial background, that I shouldn't get involved in the negotiations with Accenture. The bank's coup at that time would lead on it with either Victoria or Nathan, and those were hard-headed discussions. I guess the one other thing I would say is, as we went through late 2023 and into 2024, and we had to do the final 2 replans around where really the testing of the overall system was showing that we weren't ready, and that was a really challenging time for the programme, because we've been going a number of years. Staff had some sort of ups and downs of thinking they're about to go, and then things get delayed, and then it happens again. What was really interesting about that, and it does come back to the culture we had with Accenture, and I think that culture helped us not smooth over these difficulties, but manage them. But we had the senior person at Accenture would attend. If you look at figure 7 that talks about the governance, the top governance from 2022 onwards was the Renewal Executive Board that I chaired. But for the first part of that meeting, which would often be over an hour, and sometimes we were meeting every fortnight, the senior Accenture executive would attend that with her technical experts and would be very much part of the discussion and be acknowledging, that we might have been held up on something and that had held them up, but then they were owning when they had problems with something, and those were some of the hardest. So in the context of a successful program, those were difficult, meetings, because you'd be admitting what we'd got wrong, what they'd got wrong, that was slowing things down, or too many defects that we didn't have enough time in the program to test. So the relationship was tested, but the strength of it meant that it never broke.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I think in terms of the contract as well, there were various penalties. So if they were late on particular things, or things weren't to the quality, we could fall back to the contract if we needed to. There was also some formal governance, 2 different levels, a sort of executive liaison group and a liaison group beneath that, which were looking at the relationship and trying to catch things. But I think if things had gone very wrong, we had got some protections built into the contract.
Did you enact any penalties?
We enacted that they would pay for additional things. We
didn't need to sort of use the penalties per se, and some of those penalties could have actually gone the other way if we'd been too slow in delivering our bit. What we did do was we had a number of sort of negotiations with them around some of the change releases. So when, for example, under the replans, we negotiated with Accenture, we tried to keep that away from the team who were working most closely with it. So as Dave said, it was myself and the COO who were going for that. And there we would be looking and saying, well, what was the cause of this, and sharing costs on that, but without having to go into the actual penalties, because we...
Actually, unusual arrangement, I think.
Yeah, and I think actually the NAO report, I mean, it only covers it in a sentence or two because it's an excellent, concise report. But I think it does say that the NAO colleagues interviewed the Accenture executives, and they said it was unusual to be invited into these sort of the top level of governance, these executive meetings, and that showed, we were basically drawing on the trust we'd built up with them and this sense of joint accountability.
The core settlement engine, was that when you started out on your business case and critical path analysis, one of the major things that interesting that you built it to be almost as one of the first bits, whereas NS&I still haven't built it?
Well, but NS&I's programme, as I understand it, has 4 different elements to it. I mean, obviously they've got 25 million customers, and they've got that bit of it. I mean, ours was a pure tech programme and foundational tech, but so ours was the last thing that went live within our programme. So originally that was due to come in summer 2023, and because of the various replans, etc., we didn't end up going live with it until April 2025. But I think we finished most of the programming work on it in 2023, didn't we? And then it took 2 years of testing.
Interesting, thank you. Sarah, please.
Thank you, Chair. You've mentioned the replans a few times, and I'm keen to learn more about that. Could you explain to the committee why there needed to be 4 replans?
Maybe I can start, and then colleagues will want to come in. I mean, there were 4 replans, and they were quite different in nature. And I think the NAO report brings out that the first one that we kind of carried out over the winter of 2021 and then into 2022 was a really significant one, because that was the programme where we could step back on how the early stages of the programme was going. We talked quite a bit already about the procurement phase, how the early build was going, and we could look at not just our timelines for the programme, but also our governance and how we were organising the programme. And as the NAO report, I think NAO see this as the most strategic of the replans, because it really came from within. The second let me just finish on the first replan, but what we realised, I think, was that we were going to need more time. So we pushed back the introduction of going live on the core settlement engine into 2024. Or maybe, I can't remember, maybe autumn 23. I'd have to look at there's a very good replan table that I should probably spend more time on.
Figure 8.
Figure 8. So the first replan, it delayed the core settlement engine from September 23 to spring 24. And the other thing we did at the time of that replan was to change the governance of the programme, if you like, that followed on from that replan. I've mentioned already that we had governance. We had something called the RTGS Renewal Committee, sorry, lots of initialisms, RRC, which was chaired by Ron Khalifa, because he was he knew this world, and he was the key non-exec on our board on court. We all felt by the spring of 2022 that not only did we need to move the timeline out, but we should change the governance as we went into the delivery phase. So that's when we set up the RTGS executive board, which I chaired, that the bank's coup was on because of all the dependencies with the bank's other systems and functions. And Victoria and Nathan were on. So we moved from non-exec-led governance to exec-led governance at that point. And the third thing we did, and I think, I totally understand why it was in the original plan and why it was in the blueprint, but we de-scoped something called we took transition stage 4, which was a whole series of enhancements we were planning to make onto the new core settlement engine. We decided to take that out of the programme because it was a different kind of set of capabilities. It was going to require. It was much more. You needed to look ahead and predict what the industry was going to do and what we might need to do to support it. So things like extended operating hours, how could we ensure interoperability through, for example, synchronization with other technologies. These things were in the original blueprint and in TS4, and we just felt that they were of a different quality. So we took those out at the time of the first replan. And that really sort of sensibly focused and narrowed the scope, improved the governance, and we had a more realistic timeline. The second replan was...
That's like the opposite of scope creep. You literally just took stuff out.
Yeah, we did. I mean, we're doing it now, and we've budgeted for it. But yeah, we did. We took stuff out. I mean, it was a pretty ambitious blueprint, so it felt like we were comfortable doing it, and industry was very comfortable with us doing it, because they weren't sure when they were going to have the capabilities, and they also saw that the change agenda, with the new messaging standard, with everything else that we were demanding in TS2, and particularly TS2 was going to be challenging. The second replan was really when we were hit by a shock by the ECB. This comes back to the change agenda being so crowded across payments and settlements. When the ECB had to move their adoption of the ISO 20022 standard, industry said to us, look, there's not enough time to keep to your original planning schedule, and we didn't feel we could either, because other bits of the bank systems had to move to that standard. So that dependency really helped then. And the third and the fourth ones were really difficult at the time for the programme, but they were much more tactical. The overall strategy was, when we go live on this thing, it has to work. So they were strategic in that sense, but they were more about moving a few months in order that we could complete the testing, which was just throwing up too many defects that then had to be either resolved or postponed. That was a really stressful period because of the turnover. I think we were probably meeting, the REB was meeting every week or fortnight during that time. Were we on track? So those were the 4 replans. So you might look at it ex post and say, could we have maybe not had to have one of those, or maybe, and you might argue which one. We've all probably got our own views on that. But actually, back to the NAO saying the overall delay was 19 months, 18, 19 months on a 9-year programme. So it's a bit, quite a bit longer than originally, but the overspends and stuff, we felt it was still value for money, and pleased that the NAO also concluded that.
Is there anything you wanted to add to any of that?
I think those are the key points. Very happy to go into any more detail on those. I think doing a replan can be a brave decision, but as Dave says, we're sort of front of mind this is critical national infrastructure. We need to get it right, and it was absolutely key. And I think that the final replan, it was just looking at where we were. The main system was working fine. The contingency wasn't where we wanted it to be. The monitoring system was almost too sensitive. I say to people, it's a bit like when you're sort of your car sensors are helping you park and they pick up too many signals, and that wasn't going to work if you're looking at systems. And also because we'd been spending time on some of the other issues and the defects, the operators just hadn't had enough time to use the system in absolute steady state. And one of the things we were doing was actually giving surveys to the operators. How confident are you that you've had the training you want? How confident are you that you can run this? And that just wasn't where we wanted it to be. And so it was a tough decision to make, because we'd have dearly loved to have gone live that October, but it would have been a risk to it, and that extra time really helped, and it gave the operators that confidence they needed, and we had the contingency we needed.
With those replans in mind, what was the biggest change to your approach or mindset that you had to make in order to get this programme delivered?
I think... Sorry, do you want to...
I was going to... I mean, some of it was really thinking about the staff.
Yeah.
Because it was a long programme and it was intense, and we needed to keep people sort of fresh enough to do what they were doing. There was some sort of change in staff because you go through a programme on different phases, you need different skills, but we needed our top people there throughout. How did we sort of keep incentivising them to keep going and so selling the vision? I think an absolute key part of it was the transparency and people feeling confident that they could call out when things were not how they thought they should be. So as I said, it's quite brave to replan, and that first big replan, you see, we did move quite significantly, but people could see, okay, we've flagged an issue, we've been listened to, and we've got the support to do it. So I think that people could see, okay, if we flag things, we can get results rather than being worried. So I think that really helped going forward, and also just sort of emphasis on testing and also with industry, because as Dave said, we weren't the only player in the game here. We were moving to ISO 2082, a global messaging standard. A lot of other central banks around the world were doing the same. We needed to find slots that weren't taken by other central banks. London, key financial capital, lots of banks here moved there. So we used to try and think, what impact does this have on industry? How do we keep our staff going through this? How can we keep the transparency to make sure that we're ready to move and understand if we might need another replan? There's some of the things that come to mind.
And I think this kind of...
Sorry, Nathan.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Just linking on to what Victoria was saying, the team sentiment was really key. After the first replan, the whole listening to your operations, listening to your teams was really fundamental. So much so in the later replans, actually, the team sentiment is one of the key kind of go criteria for us for go live. Are the team comfortable? Are they happy? So through the resets, one of the first things we did was get the teams together, understand what their concerns were, surface everything, as a reset moment.
How big is the team we're talking about?
It was up to about 450 at
so
peak.
With Accenture and the bank up to 450.
On figure 10, there's a really useful table at the bottom of figure 10 on page 35 of the NAO report. So we were 23, we were still at 451 for the total staff, of which 144 were bank staff. And then into 2024, when we had to do those two replans in quite quick succession. I mean, I think this point about the people, that was most challenging through, for me, I think 2023 and 24, because as I said to you at the outset, I didn't have an experience of this kind of program. Learning how critical testing was from particularly Nathan's side on the technology side, and how you had to just keep, just had to keep going until you got it right. But then the people issues really came to the fore in 2024, because we'd already introduced the target, the structure of the target operating model for what the new world was going to look like. We'd been recruiting people into that. Meanwhile, the program is running. Those new people, as Victoria was saying, are sort of having to deal with the fact that things aren't quite right. So when you turn on your dashboard in the morning and it's just flashing red, and you're thinking, well, I'm going to be expected to run this thing in a few months. I don't think they're going to be ready. So we had to manage, and we did have we were really strong on this no surprises culture, both with staff inside and outside, with industry, because I think when we got to deciding we're going to replan each time, we'd have this kind of like, well, how's it going to go down with industry? Because, it was going to cost them as well. And it was really interesting each time, because those were actually some of the easiest, because we had such a good relationship with them, they would like, okay, no, we understand this, I mean, the ECB one, the second replan was straightforward, because they were like, yeah, okay, you've been hit by a shock. But then the third and the fourth ones, they're like, well, no, of course, this is, if your infrastructure doesn't work, then, I'm going to be held to account in my business, in my commercial bank or whatever it is, for it not going wrong. So please, their incentives were aligned with us on this no surprises culture.
Really helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. Dave, you said something interesting in answer to one of Sarah's questions, and it was this. I mean, as we've obviously looked at a lot of these big, complex type of projects, and governance is always key, and it's usually the lack of governance, of course, is the problem. When you published your blueprint in 2017, did you envisage that in the transition from the planning to the implementation stage that you would need to change the governance from non-exec to exec?
No, I think that was a kind of learning by doing and drawing on the experience.
What was it that you learned that caused you to want to change the governance?
Well, that we needed to... I think it would... I mean, again, I don't want to put words into, my colleagues on the Bank of England's board or court's mouths, but I think they felt uncomfortable that they were in late 21 and early 22 that they were kind of court has to make any decisions involving the budget and has to be cited on key strategic decisions, but they didn't feel they were close enough to what was happening in the programme. When you look at that, I mean, it doesn't even, you can see where court is mentioned in that governance slide, figure 7. They're over on the right. I just don't think they felt, the non-execs in particular, the chair of court is a non-exec, and the other governors weren't cited. This was such a big, detailed programme that I think we probably could have worked it out for ourselves, that we'd have to go from that non-exec to executive change, but the fact that we were doing replans enabled us to do that. It may well be that Victoria is about to say that actually it was always the plan to do it. I suspect it was, since Victoria had executive responsibility for other big programmes in the bank. But I remember it. I guess the other thing to say is that the bank is quite, some would say we're a bit too good at governance. We do have quite complicated governance already. And so dropping this programme into it, it was clear that having a non-exec leading it just wasn't going to work. So I don't think the blueprint set it out in detail, but we made the right decision.
If I could just add a couple of points. I think that when the programme moved from the idea of the blueprint and the vision to actually we need to put together the full business case and things, we thought about the governance, and partly because there's going to be a number of big procurements, it was a significant costing programme, as you'll have seen. So court needed sight of it. What we were doing didn't necessarily fit into the overall timeline of court if we needed to fit into a particular procurement piece. But also we needed a lot of time and we wanted their expertise. So for the first couple of years of the programme, having the RTGS Renewal Committee chaired by Ron and one of the other non-execs, and that was really powerful because they were bringing in their input at things around commercials, around procurement, looking at the overall business case. By the time we were moving to that first replan, that had been done and we were moving much more into actual delivery. So I think it was just a change in focus. So different things were being looked at, and I think that's where it became more important for the exec to be sort of more involved and fully cited. We still went to court pretty much every meeting. Mm-hmm. If we didn't go to court for a meeting, they'd have a written update because this is a significant programme for the bank. They wanted to follow the story, they wanted to know what was happening. It was key for the bank's reputation, it's key for the financial system. And I think that was really helpful because we could update them. And I used to say this is a warts and all view. So when we sort of approached the replans, they weren't surprised. And that meant that we got some really healthy challenge for them. But it meant that we felt comfortable saying, actually, we are going to need to replan. But I think it was the programme got to a different stage, and hence you needed to look at governance. We looked at the governance of the programme board that I chaired. We changed the frequency after TS 2.1 because we didn't need as much, and we changed some of the people. So I think governance needs to evolve through different stages of programmes.
I happened to be looking at minutes of bank court meetings because I was looking for something else, and I saw that actually last week what the court does with its minutes while things are kind of in flight, like our programme. There was quite a bit of the discussions that we had that were, weren't published at the time. But last week we published quite a lot of the minutes from 2023, and they include quite a bit more about RTGS. So you see that, as Victoria says, we were a standing item at court, but often the minutes would just say the programme was discussed at the time, because obviously there are all kinds of sensitivities, and then subsequently there's a bit more detail, and then we can, we're obviously giving you a lot more detail now. I think what was really helpful for us was we did always feel supported by court because they believed that we got the culture right. One question they always asked us was, are you being open and honest with the challenges you're facing? That was where we really felt held to account, because what they didn't want surprises, because obviously their reputation as the bank's governing body would be hit if we were doing things for the wrong reasons rather than for the right reasons.
Very helpful. Thank you very much. Chris Kane, please.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I had a number of questions about governance, but you've covered them all very well, so thank you for
sorry
that.
about that.
I'll move on and ask about culture, if that's okay. Nathan, you were talking about the co-location aspect of fostering that good culture earlier on. I wonder if we could just go into that a little bit more and talk about how you went about creating that culture, because I think one of the lessons we have to learn is how we can replicate that. And given that you said co-locating was important, but then you said pandemic came in at the same time, I wonder if you could tease out how you went about creating the culture. And Victoria, I'm going to ask you for the sort of other side of that with the same question.
No, it's a really good question. It's something we've been really passionate about, actually, is creating that culture, especially with a partner kind of coming in. So multiple things we've done, really, if you think about it over the time. Little innocuous things like if you're a third-party contractor, for example, and you come into the bank, you have a different coloured lanyard, for example. I know it sounds pretty silly, but we made decisions to make sure that the identity of everybody on the programme was the same, so everyone had the same kind of lanyard and stuff like that. So trying to create that we all belong together, all co-located in one area. When the pandemic actually happened, we actually moved to kind of online meetings. But we're still quite successful in terms of our ability to do that. We just rolled out Teams back then, so Microsoft Teams. So we were able to host quite big, significant calls online, actually, which was really great, to be able to get contributions from absolutely everybody so they could feel like they're part of these big calls. So the way in which we approach the work as well is that we try to chunk the work up into big chunks, deliverables, every quarter. So we'd have big planning meetings, for example, where we'd all come together, be that virtual, or when the pandemic was over, we'd get together in meeting rooms together and stuff like that to plan what the next phase of the delivery was going to be. So it's all about us picking up the work, having these shared outcomes and shared visions for what we're trying to do, and obviously try and move those forward each time. So the culture's kind of started from the very top as well. We had lots of very open conversations with the leadership in Accenture about the culture that we wanted. We had a manifesto that we kind of jointly created together, which I think is referenced in the documents that you've got in front of you as well, like a joint chart about how we want to proceed and how we want to operate together, about treating everyone with mutual respect, all that kind of good stuff. So there's a ton of stuff that we did around the edges in order to try and create a kind of one team ethos, all focusing on these shared outcomes and the shared visions and stuff, and using technology or co-location as the kind of key enablers for that. Bearing in mind that our partner had a significant footprint in what they call List X, so a secure facility in Newcastle. So we actually had a divide, as it were. So we spent a lot of time with the leadership team going up to Newcastle and then coming back down as well. We spent a lot of time travelling to and from Newcastle to make sure that the team feel integrated as much as possible. So embracing new technology to try and bring the teams together, and then really embracing the kind of the ways of working. I talked about this more agile kind of ways of working and these ceremonies that we had, weekly meetings and stuff. We did a hell of a lot in the early days to try and build the camaraderie, the relationships, and people get to know one another. And we were a big team at one point, but it did feel like quite a family that we kind of created.
Anything to add to that?
I think that the one team approach was absolutely key, partly with Accenture and technology, but also bringing in the operators as well. Initially, there were a few comments, the programme said this, the business said that, and it was like, actually, that isn't going to work. So we moved to having joint town halls, bringing everyone together, joint newsletters, quizzes, trying to have a bit of fun along the way. A lot of cake got eaten. There were bake-offs, but just trying to bring a sense of, we're all in this together. We had a number of dress rehearsals, which was sort of practicing cutting the system over and back over weekends. People were literally working on shifts. They'd sometimes have a theme for that, be sharing sort of snacks. Nathan and I would go to all of those. I wasn't much use on a dress rehearsal, but just to show that the leaders cared about the teams, we were prepared to put in some of our time as well as them, I think was important. That idea of transparency was key. I mean, what I tend to say in meetings is, to me, red means we can go and ask for help. Red doesn't mean you should be hiding it, you should be scared. So I think bringing that up and seeing that actually if people flag things, we would look into it was really key. We did have something called the transparency channel, so if people had concerns about the programme but didn't want to raise them with anyone in particular, they could put this through as an anonymous way of just making sure we could flush out sort of any concerns there. But I think really, and also celebrating successes. Yes, it was a long programme, but there are a number of things along the way that we could say, yes, that's been a good dress rehearsal, or yes, we've gone live with that, and helping them to understand how everything fitted into the bigger picture. And it was just keep reminding people why we are here.
It sounds fabulous, but it's also it sounds very basic. It sounds like the sort of thing we always want to do. So I suppose, so Dave, maybe I can ask you, looking down on that, why do you think it was successful? What do you think strategically was the things that made all that come together?
Well, because I think all of that really good but quite obvious stuff happened. But I also think we were quite good at then linking it back to the core mission of the bank. So I didn't get up to Newcastle as much as Nathan and Victoria and colleagues did, but because remember there was a lot else going. It wasn't just the pandemic. Had a lot of other shocks that I was dealing with in my wider responsibilities. Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We had banks failing in early 2023. But when I would try and speak, when I did go up to Newcastle, I would just re-emphasise that this programme, although it's all about real-time gross settlement, it's supporting all the payments that happen in the UK in the sterling system, as Victoria was saying right in the answer to the first question. Saying that RTGS is also, it is how we operate the bank's balance sheet. So whatever we're doing across the bank's balance sheet, when I'm as an MPC member setting bank rate, one of the 9 people who votes on bank rate, that is affected through RTGS. When we're deciding how big our balance sheet is and what operations we're going to use, those all are operationalised through RTGS. And I think that helped it meant that we were able to break down this sense, any sense of them and us on the programme, but also a sense, because I would imagine that some technology colleagues within the bank might feel a bit detached from those kind of core things that the Bank of England is known for doing, trying to get us across. It probably sounds a bit woolly, but that sense of common purpose, I think it did help knit it all together. All these different elements did add up to, God, this is why it's critical national infrastructure, but also why it's central to the day-to-day running of the Bank of England. So, and I think you never quite know why things work as they do, and it will probably work differently in different organisations, because I think the bank has probably got a reputation compared to, say, some civil service departments as being quite hierarchical. So trying to break that down a bit as well, have leaders who are willing, as Victoria says, to turn up for a dress rehearsal on a Saturday afternoon. And, we would do that. It was symbolic. It was even more symbolic in my case. Victoria would have actually been able to do something. I was literally just saying, look, like you've had to give up your Saturday, I have as well. I mean, it seems like a kind of obvious thing to do as a leader.
Lots of little things.
Yeah,
it seems like.
but also some big top-down messages about why RTGS is central to what the bank does.
I mean, that's just to drill down a couple of things. The business and technical specialists working well together, that comes up often in this committee that doesn't happen. What do you think? What do we need to take away from your project specifically about that point that makes that work that can be learned elsewhere? The business and technical specialists, they did seem to work well together, which is unusual.
I think it's that shared vision, that shared outcome, I think was the key bit about why we're there and what we're trying to do to bring that case for change and why we're doing it as a team together rather than it being separate, I think was key, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that was important, as was the co-location, so they could see things happening, but also with the technical specialists, we enabled them to see what the live operators were doing on a day-to-day basis. They could kind of understand it, so it wasn't quite such a alien bit. But also, very early on, we moved some of the operators actually onto the programme itself, and so that meant that they could bring their skills, and they were beginning to sort of feed in at the very early stages in terms of, okay, if you're creating a screen for us, it's not going to work if you do that. So there was a bit of co-creation between business and tech, but initially we didn't quite get it right. They were seen as a bit too distant, and then it's actually, we're building this for the operators, let's get them in earlier so they can help shape it a bit.
And I think it is a bit... the Bank of England has a lot of different things it's responsible for and a lot of different operational systems. And again, it may be a bit easier for us than for some bodies because we're quite big, certainly compared to where I used to work, the Treasury, 5,500 staff. But it's all our systems are quite centralised in... So talking about RTGS, settlements and a bit on CHAPS, the payment system today, but all our market operations that run off the balance sheet, that would be in my markets directorate. They're running things like quantitative tightening, auctions, they're doing other things for our repo balance sheet. We've got a whole programme of change there to bring those systems up to date. And what I think we're learning is that when we make those technology changes with those systems, it's really important for the technology side to see the consequences for then the bank's operations in those other areas. And this is something Nathan and I, because we've got a very big ongoing agenda that the NAO bring out to modernise our other systems, because we've got quite a lot of obsolescence. And so we're seeing changes in all those operations, in all those systems happening now. RTGS, we're seeing changes on the RTGS system. These other changes, they're learning from what RTGS got right to make sure that if you're introducing a change, and nearly always you've got the testing right, then the operation the next day, if it's a Monday, isn't upset. But occasionally we have had issues, haven't we, where we haven't spotted something in testing. And so having that culture where the business and the technology side are as close as we can get them together in their understanding of why this is being done. As I say, I think it's easier for us because we are quite centralised. It's all happening in Threadneedle Street pretty much. I mean, obviously not our data centres and stuff like that. But it means, compared to, say, a very big government department where you might have, arm's length bodies doing a lot of it, it is easier for us, but we've certainly benefited from it.
And last one from me, just you've talked about openness and the no surprises culture. I can't resist asking if there's anything that surprised you about the success of the no surprises culture. Is there anything you want us to not lose in our deliberations about how important the openness and the no surprise approach played to the cultural success of this?
I'd say something that echoes something Victoria. It will only work, and the bank has learned, because I think the bank in the past, say when we did a technology project back in 2003, Globus, and there was some problems with when that went live. And I think there was some reporting at the time that said, that we needed to move to more of a no surprises culture rather than a culture where things will be all right. It does require all the institutions' leadership to buy into it, because, as Victoria says, if you every time you see a red flag in a risk report, you sort of like, you come down hard on the person who's revealing it, and you challenge them, and you don't ask them what's the path for, from amber and then to green. You say to them, well, how did that happen? What went wrong? Then your no surprises culture is going to fail at the outset. So you have to have the leadership capacity and the culture to enable that to happen. We were fortunate that RTGS was just running every day. I'll come back to that point. It wasn't a very flexible, functional, state-of-the-art system, but it was running while all this was happening, which again helped us to set the right tone. But I would say that tone from the top is absolutely central, because particularly in a relatively hierarchical organisation like the bank, if they see that people like Victoria are saying, oh, well, look, that, see you've got a red now, understand why you've got it, how you're going to get back to amber or green, then that's the way to success.
Thank you very much, Chris. Sorry, I didn't warn you at the beginning, but we have a habit of taking a break in the middle. We will take a 5-minute break, which means we'll be back at 1:45, please. Just a small word of warning. The microphones will be open, so just be careful what you say. And we start with, I should have prepared myself, shouldn't I? Tris, of course.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask some questions just around the lessons for the bank's wider programme. So, and I will reflect on some of the lessons from this project and programme, but also where we're going in the future in light of some of the NO reports. So just in a broad point, so in 3.1.4, it talks about 19 high-level lessons from the programme. But more widely to managing change projects in the bank. I was just wondering, have you risk rated those 19 recommendations in terms of ones that are probably much more substantive in terms of future change management? And could you just enunciate what some of those 19 recommendations were alongside that?
Yeah, certainly. I'll start and then I'm happy for others. So I think, although on one level you could say that RTGS is very different, it's an enormous programme, critical national infrastructure, I think a lot of programmes have got the same sort of fundamentals, and so they may not all, for example, so one of the lessons is around governance. They may not all want the same governance as us, but I think the fact that you should think very carefully about the programme, do you need a bespoke governance framework, how would you flex it, is important. So I think some of the key things that we're doing are, for example, people who've rolled off the programme are now being embedded into other programmes in the bank, so we can use that skill set. We've held a number of deep dives of some of the key programmes that are taking place in the bank at the moment, saying these are our lessons learnt. So we've been presenting those lessons learnt to others in the bank. I think the central change and planning function has been sort of now rolling out requests for actually everyone should have a more formal lessons learnt approach to these. And some of them, and I think there might be a figure that's got the 19, otherwise happy to share that afterwards. Some of them are much simpler. Some of them are big and around governance, a lot about culture, a lot about staff location. And so what we're trying to do is it's on page 39. Sorry, I don't want to read a whole load of icons out to you. So really trying to understand which are the ones that are most relevant to a particular programme. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, but what's been absolutely key is we have the lessons learnt, we've shared it with the change and planning, and this is being rolled out across other programmes. I can delve into some more of these lessons learnt if you want, or and pick a few. I've got one or 2 points on some of those lessons. But I'm happy to hear the wider overview first. Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would come back to what we were just touching on before the break. You know, that in the particularly in the markets and banking directorates, in my responsibilities, we carry out a lot of the other functions of the central bank, and quite a few of those systems are also either nearing obsolescence or are not as flexible as we want them to be, given what we're now asking them to do. As we've been able to look at investing and in the priorities for which bits of obsolescence to deal with first, and I would stress, this is not just us. A lot of commercial banks, in particular across the financial system, they've got obsolescent systems that they're having to update. So, particularly as technologies improve, the kind of technological solution we went for, and as you move away from these very clunky mainframe-based approaches. But I mean, we're already learning the key lessons in a couple of ways that I'll mention. One, as I was talking about before the break, is around testing. Absolutely making sure that we're as rigorous as we can be. I mean, actually with RTGS, because it is so critical and it's designated as C&I, we were, for example, with our, the first replan we were talking about before the break, we had to build an entire new infrastructure fabric because the testing couldn't be working on the bank's we couldn't trust it to be done on the bank's enterprise estate. We had to create a separate testing environment. That's always not, with most of our systems, that won't be possible. So we will have to, we'll have to prioritise just, how far we can take the testing. We'll usually be able to do weeks or months of testing, but not the years that we did in the case of RTGS. So learning of the criticality of the testing, which is an obvious thing. I mean, how it matters for the business and the technologists who are producing the new code or the new systems to work together so they can understand, okay, that's almost worked. We can make that work with a workaround, and then that can be fixed, that can be dealt with quickly. That would be the first thing. The second thing I'd say, a lesson for us at the bank, which Nathan because he started off just on RT and then he became CIO in 2023. So he's now responsible for the whole of the bank's tech estate. And he's had a strong ally in me on this. Is a big lesson is that we have to go ahead and do we can't keep pushing the investment to the right. There comes a point where you have to do the investment. We did that in RTGS, responding to the outage in 2014, a multi-year program, taking that more strategic approach right across our estate. And it's not just in my areas of central banking operations. It's true of what we're doing on finance modernisation. It's true of what we're doing with our basic records handling system. We are upgrading these systems. We're prioritising investment to do that. And we're going into that in a more strategic way. And I'd say compared to when I started at the bank 8 years ago, that's a key lesson we've learned from RTGS is you've got to be strategic about this and prioritise investment. So those would be a couple of high-level lessons. One very more prosaic lesson, which Victoria was touching on, is that across my area, but also across what we're doing with the changes we're making to how we do monetary policy following the review that Professor Bernanke did for us, we are getting the experience exchange from people who've worked on RTGS. So we've got people running these other significant projects who've sort of who've been associated with a successful project in RTGS and then have been exported. They haven't left the bank, which is good, I think, for the bank and the public sector. I'm sure they could have done, but they've moved on to other projects. So getting that, not so much knowledge transfer, because RT is quite specific, but that experience transfer of what worked, that's probably one of the most valuable lessons for me is, there are lots of other, but to try and hold on to those staff within public sector pay and career planning so that they can go on to hopefully greater things with other projects.
If I could just focus on one or two elements that come out of the report, I appreciate your answers to those. One of those things is referred to in 2.7, and specifically around contingency risk. So it was identified at the start of this project that the final business case budget of 375 million included contingency of 40 million, 11% of the budget, which was under the 15 to 25% industry standard. I just wondered, could you give me some commentary about why the 11% was used, because this is a very risky project. This was new, it was innovative, it was exciting, but nevertheless it hadn't been pioneered elsewhere. So why opt, for my reading, for a lower contingency than perhaps the industry standard would be? Can I ask that question?
Yeah, I mean, I remember because as I've said, in our kind of senior governance, it would be quite bottom up in terms of whether it was governance on the procurement or on the overall business case. But then it would be challenging. So it would be taking account of the details, but then it would be challenging of those kind of things. And I think the reason that we felt comfortable at the time with that 11% rather than something that was more the industry standard was because, remember the business plan was in 2020, the final business plan was 2020. We'd done 3 years of work since the blueprint before that. So we'd done all that plan analysis design phase pretty much to get to that point. So I think we had a pretty good idea by then including all the technical requirements we were gonna need. Nathan and the team had been working on this for a best part of 2 years by the time we got to that final business plan and the costing of it. So we knew within reason, we knew what we were within the scope we had at the time, because as I was saying earlier, in the replan, we did narrow the scope and take some of that TS4 things out, which actually helped save us some money relative to them, which had to be spent on the rest of the replan. So would I change that with hindsight and go for a bigger number, given the way we were thinking we were going to be approaching the procurement, given how confident we were in our technical requirements? I probably would put it up a bit in order, that it would have met an industry standard. But it didn't feel to me as if it was hugely off at the time. And given how tightly the thing was specified and how we were reasonably confident from the early stages of the procurement, I think that we would be able to do this. It didn't feel unrealistic.
We did break down each item and give a range of costs that it could be, and obviously then we took the middle kind of range, I think it was to Dave's point as well. So we did a lot of work on what the risk could be and what the range of those could be, and then obviously taking a management decision on what we thought was appropriate at the time.
I think it was quite bottom up in terms of looking at the likely risk to individual sections rather than taking a sort of set number. And I think at the time it also said this would exclude big exogenous shocks as well. But I think part of the driver was in the bank we wouldn't typically go for big contingency numbers because we need to really be sort of pushing hard on that governance and value for money and sticking to them. But what we did find was actually when we needed to move and could explain to court what had happened, they did then extend. But it's a different way of doing it.
Okay, thank you for that answer, and I appreciate your candour on the contingency level in hindsight, because I think that's part of what we're trying to get to the detail on. My other question just concerns resource risk. So it was highlighted in the report that you did have to, in 2.11 and 2.12, that this did have an impact on other bank projects and technology change programmes. And it also mentioned in the report that you were utilising other skills within the bank to have to come into the programme. Can I just get some detail on that? Because obviously if you're taking resource from one programme and moving it into another, that might have a material impact on other programmes, which obviously are not mentioned here, which have a lower risk profile, I suspect. So can I just get some detail around what was resourcing, you've alluded to this, but was resourcing a strategic challenge, and how are we mitigating that for future projects?
I'll start on this, and Victoria was, certainly through the first replan, Victoria had responsibility for one of these other very big programmes. I was thinking the ISO programme for the bank. So I guess it's kind of implicit in the NAO's report, but RTG, all of our systems are important, but RTGS is it's the crown jewels really in terms of how we think about it, and so it did get priority in terms of it, as you read in the report and as we planned it. It typically would get its own dedicated teams on things like procurement. It wouldn't be competing. Budgeting. The budgeting was done outside of our that's not to say, as we were just discussing, that the budgeting was unconstrained, but it wasn't in our BAU budget for running the bank. And so inevitably, there were dependencies that we were very conscious of, and priority that was given to RT. And I'll give you one example. The next biggest project that the bank did over this period was itself moving to the ISO 20022 messaging standard, because that affected a lot of our other functional areas and operations. And that project, I can remember this happening a couple of times with the SRO for that project, who also worked for me, coming along and saying, RTGS's needs mean I'm having to give a project management function or something across. So that's one dependency. Second one, as RT got replanned, the rest of the bank's technology had to sort of projects had to move in line, because there wasn't either the staff or the capacity always. Although we had distinct staff on RT, there would be consequences, particularly on, when you were looking at the calendar of change, when could you drop these other go-lives of these other projects? And RT got priority, and then the other things had to fit in. So it was, I'd say early on that created some challenges, and I think the NAO report singled this out, that dependencies through that 2021-2022 period, when we were doing the first replan, we learnt more and more. We knew about the ISO dependency, but some of the other dependencies with the bank's other change agenda became more and more apparent. I think then as we kind of got through the main hump of RT, and actually staffing started to go down a bit in 23 and 24, and as the bank was able to begin to breathe out a bit and think about what else did it want to do, that dependency picture was also really clear. So when RT stayed on track, because you were always having to plan in case it didn't, then other things could come in and we could start to spend money and use resources elsewhere that were getting freed up. So we had this big plan as people rolled off the programme, because we didn't, we really wanted to make use of them, as I was saying with some key people. Where might they be able to go and help with another of our bits of change? But it was, I would say that was an area where as an organisation, because we did have to stretch out RT, we also learned by doing to sort out those dependencies, and we will not lose that learning. I think that's the key point. It was quite an experience to go through it with our biggest ever tech project. Now we've got much more of a sort of portfolio of projects where they're having to compete more with each other rather than one being the priority, although probably Court would say that Bernanke is the priority. But I would make the case for some of my projects being, but we're very conscious now, and I think as an organisation we're managing that strategic plan around those dependencies. There's not to downplay that there are trade-offs and it's challenging. Yeah.
I mean, my follow-up just to that one before I move on is that when you did have those resource challenges, was that flagged within the risk framework, within your 3-line of defence risk framework? So was audit, assurance and control aware of that? I
think the dependencies challenge came through more and more from second line, because first line was focused on the programme. Yep. So the bank's risk function became more and more focused, for example, in the Renewal Executive Board. They would be flagging those sensitivities. Audit the bank's audit function had a dedicated bit that was RT, but then the rest of the audit function is doing everything else. So that was able to internalise. That was able to not internalise, it was our job to, but that was able to flag those respective concerns. And in my regular meetings before every ARCO with the bank's chief auditor, he would tell me about RT and then would tell me about the risks to my other issues from the trade-offs and then to the wider bank. So I think that was certainly part of the third line's approach.
Yeah. So I think internal audit and risk attended all of the programme board meetings that I chaired, and they also attended the REB meetings. They were having full sight of that, and for a period where the dependencies between RTGS and the other bank programmes were at their height, there was a dedicated slot at the REB meetings to look at those dependencies, some of them in terms of actual people, some of them just in terms of how much tech change can any organisation absorb.
Just lastly, just looking for forward programmes. So in 2.6, there's a sentence at the end which I think is quite general, but it says the renewal programme delay. This was in relation to the timeline on your this programme. It's at the lower end of the range of delays we have observed in our work on government digital change programmes between 1 and 8 years. So it shows you that this project has been relatively successful. But going forward, you've obviously got an ambitious programme of future projects extending the operating hours, 24/7 market, the resilient channels. Do we have the capacity within the organisation, having learnt the lessons now, to build on those future initiatives within appropriate timeframes based on sort of the commentary we've had around previous delays and on average delays within projects that have been delivered? Not this one specifically, but in relation to that point.
Well, for that kind of, what you just set out was kind of three key elements in the RTG's future roadmap. So when we de-scoped Transition Stage 4 and took it out of the programme, we replaced it with this sense of what's the future roadmap working with industry. And we have resourced the RTGS BAU, the team which is running the new RTGS system. It has change as an integral part of what it's doing. So, for example, last week we put out our proposal on extended operating hours. We're going to open RT at 1:30 every morning. From September 27, that's consistent with the previous consultation we'd done. And so absolutely we are resourced, and that is resourced within the ongoing run of RT. There's then all the dependency that has with the bank's wider tech modernisation and systems modernisation agenda, but those two things can coexist because RT has been resourced, and to be honest, quite a lot of that RT agenda will be about what the industry, we're telling the industry now we're going to 1:30 opening. There's then going to have to be further discussions about how close to 24/7 operation we get. But all of that RT piece and the three elements you mentioned there is distinct but compatible with the bank's wider modernisation agenda, but that will have to be managed within the bank's overall footprint. But the dependencies are now, we're very much aware of those ex ante rather than learning as we go. We know some of it's internalised to the fact that I'm Deputy Governor for the three of the biggest operational areas in markets, banking and payments, so I can't say I can internalise them to me, but I'm very conscious of the trade-offs. But I think we're in a good place to be as strategic as we can. But ultimately, back to finances, we fund these changes to RT ultimately through a levy, and in the short term, we do recoup most of the bank's running costs, from different levies, but we're very conscious of VFM. So it's not like we can not be managed. We are subject to trade-offs on these things, but we know what is a priority.
Yeah. If I could just add to that, I think the build of RT so far, we've done the main technical piece, and so that has already built in the capacity and capability for some of these other things. So we've already built in the capacity for more players. We've already built in the capability to move to near 24/7. So on that piece, it's very much more sort of business change piece and industry change. And with synchronisation, we're actually running some experiments with industry. We've got a synchro lab. So I think one of the lessons we've probably taken away is make sure you do stuff in absorbable chunks, both for the bank and for industry. And also one of the key bits in terms of extending the operating hours, so as Dave said, opening at 1:30 in the morning, but potentially longer, is what is the impact of that across the rest of the bank? How quickly can the rest of the bank move? So I think that's how we've sort of opened it up, and just always remembering this isn't just a tech change, this is a business transformation and it's an industry transformation.
And just finally on that, because it goes to the point that we use this phrase all the time, and it was pleasing to see NAO had picked up on it, think it comes up in section 3 of the report, around evergreening. So this kind of business change, what we don't want to do. So RT was introduced, I think, in 1996. Mainframe language, all of that, but pretty not easy to change in response to a changing world. What we've now, our target operating model for RT is very much based around this notion of evergreening. So you invest as you go. As Victoria says, a lot of the foundational investment has been done with what we've produced with the new RT system. But then the business change for doing that evergreening means you've got to be working alongside your technology capacity all the time. We will need a bigger standing technology function to be able to evergreen either RT or some of my systems or other bits of the bank's systems, rather than you do these big once a generation projects and you bring in lots of contractors. But that means the bank's balance of the number of technologists we'll have will change over time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your answers.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to come in to sort of move us along a little bit from where Chris was. So the publication of today's conveyancer publicised the fact that you've just told us that the Bank of England has confirmed it will extend operating hours of the high-value payment system CHAPS from its current core operating hours from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. As efforts to operate a settlement 24 hours a day, as you've said, continue. So can you explain to us the importance of being able to operate these systems 24 hours a day?
Well, I think there is some. 24 hours a day is we're not there yet, but obviously, and this is a key point. RTGS is a wholesale system, so it's operating in settlement in wholesale financial markets, and it's settling wholesale payments in the way it operates. We have the main retail payment. I think it's figure 1 or 2. The main retail payment systems, dock into it, but RT is operating in that wholesale space, and wholesale markets are global, and so being able to open, as long as is practical, will help when thinking about different time zones. Equally, some of the more modern systems, certainly some of the ones built on modern technologies where the ledgers can, distributed ledger technologies, they can be confident if they work in the security of settlement. They can settle instantaneously, potentially at any time. So we need to be able to be interoperable with those, even though we have not built RT with that technological solution at its core. So there's both a kind of global markets perspective to this, and there's being fit for the future in terms of how settlement is going to work in the future. So that's that's why we knew we needed to extend the hours from really from the blueprint. It was always, we don't want to be building something that people aren't going to be able to use. That would be my high level, but Victoria will give you probably a better answer.
I think that with RT, we've very much built it for industry and there to meet the demand for industry. So just thinking about an increasingly 24/7 world, we thought for the time RT is going to be around, that will be there. It's important for cross-border payments, and it could also be important for the retail payments. But it isn't just something that we as the bank can switch on RT 24/7. We need industry to be ready. So we've been working closely with industry through a period of co-creation to understand what hours would make sense to them. And so the move to go to 1:30 in the morning, first of all, a lot of that is to do with industry demand. That's thinking that would give them an opportunity to start settling at the time that, for example, the European Central Bank is started. They are not seeing as much demand for later opening at the moment. We are going to have a separate consultation very soon, which is moving more to that near 24/7 world, understanding what industry would do with it. Some of the players are keen, some of them aren't at this stage, so we don't want to sort of open a system until industry are there and ready to use it. But key was building in the capacity and the capability for the system to be able to do that once industry was ready.
So, a few questions to test whether this RT system has got obsolescence avoidance built into it with future possible trends. So does the programme have a clear pathway to synchronised settlement services?
So on synchronisation, where we're really talking about the ability to link RTGS, the core ledger which holds central bank money, to another asset. It could, for example, be a real estate ledger, and we've run some tests with that to see if it's possible, and that means you can have a really clean, clear transaction that happens quickly. We have, in the last month, awarded 18 different participants a role in our synchronisation lab, where they will be sort of testing the technology, how does that work, can they link into the lab properly, but also understanding a bit more about the use case. So again, it comes back to what is industry demand, and so real estate, there is a potential use case there. There are players in that, some in the FX worlds. So what we're doing at the moment is working with industry to see if our solution is right. Will they use it? And the hope is that we would then move to sort of more near live next year with some tweaks depending on what industry wants.
But I would say, to Victoria's point, that we've had 18 successfully going because we ruled some out. So we've got 18 going into the lab. That gives me more confidence because, you know, there's always a slight worry that you're going to build something and then a few years later it is going to be obsolescent. And given the way that the technological solutions are moving so quickly, you know, particularly in the wholesale space, there is real potential with reducing some of the inefficiencies in settlement. We did take a strategic choice not to go down the kind of distributed ledger technology route, but we want to be interoperable with that. This synchronization uptake of 18 gives me I feel more confident in answering your question, yes, now that I've got 18 people who want to experiment in our lab than say if only 3 or 4 had. It suggests there's a lot of enthusiasm for using that kind of route to then dock back into RTGS and get your access to the bank's balance sheet and central bank money. And
does the system support atomic settlement, which both legs of the transaction are completed either simultaneously or not at all? In my property world, a purchaser and a seller. Does it support that? Because this could move us on to where you may go eventually into digital currencies. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, why don't you start on this one?
Yeah, so, I mean, we sometimes use the word atomic settlement and synchronisation almost interchangeably. So what we will be testing in the Synchro Lab is that atomic settlement of linking these two ledgers, and the payment will settle if and only if they're both ready. So that's what we're experimenting with industry at the moment. In terms of, you mentioned central bank issue digital currencies, Chair, there is a separate piece of work looking at the digital pound that is the bank and working closely with the Treasury to understand again what is the demand for that. That wouldn't take place in RT itself. It would be quite a different way of operating, much more high volume, sort of facing to consumers, but what we are clear is that it could interoperate with RTGS, and that was one of the sort of drivers for some of the earlier work we did with moving to ISO 20022, which is a new messaging language, but it's essentially enabling different systems to all take the same language. So that interoperability point is something that we think should help in terms of reducing any obsolescence, both connecting to domestic systems, but also to international ones as well.
Victoria, you must have been reading my script, because the next
My
question...
eyesight is not that good.
The next question is, do you have a published operating model for interoperability, including governance of access, messaging standards and contingency?
So in terms of, so ISO 20022 is a global message, so some of it, it gets quite geeky. It essentially does two things. One is in terms of saying, if you want to write an address, it should be in this order. That is the sort of getting the language right. And then the second bit is it gives the ability to add enhanced information, so you can put a lot more data in there, which is very helpful for firms in terms of understanding a bit more about their customers. So some of it we take as a global standard, and some of the teams in the bank are on international committees that are refining that. We have also done some work in the UK itself in terms of what we call a common credit message, which is looking at, for example, housing payments, again saying if you are going to have a housing transaction, these are the key fields that you need to fill in, so how you can use that enhanced data a bit more. And we've also set some parameters that would mean that if there's a priority payment, we can pick them out. So if there was a problem with RTGS, or if there was a problem with one of the participants, using this sort of ISO data, they now know how to flag which are the priority ones. And we can say, well, if there's any capability to process 10, we can pull them out. So so two bits, some stuff we're doing in the UK, and also we're working internationally to sort of try and spread the word as more systems adopt ISO 20022.
I must be totally transparent in my question. When I said in my world, I meant I'm a chartered surveyor, and I declare that as an interest. What do you see as the biggest future benefits of the programmes for those using RTGS? Where are the future developments, and will this programme, how long will it be remaining in process, or will it be able to transfer into these new technologies, or will there come a time when it is obsolescent and you will have to go on to a new programme?
So the way it's been built is in terms of it's a much more flexible and modular architecture, and Nathan can come in on this if he wants to, which enables us to sort of change pieces much more easily and also to build onto it. Some of the things we've been really trying to think, how might the world change? So as Dave said, although we decided not to build RTGS itself on distributed ledger technology, we ran some proof of concepts a number of years ago to make sure that we could link into that. So we're trying to keep there. We built in capacity for a lot more players. One of the things we're really keen to do is to attract more players into RTGS as direct participants, and the benefits that they can get, bring in some more competition, innovation, which hopefully then leads to better results for the end consumers. So we've been trying to think about those pieces. I think synchronisation could be a real game changer if that comes through, and there's the demand for that. The extended hours again help with the particularly cross-border payments. So I think we're already seeing some things we can do with it. Much greater use of APIs, so introduced APIs for the first time. We're seeing some strong take-up from industry, and we want to increase more of those. We're always looking to refine it. So, for example, what we call a liquidity saving mechanism, which is essentially setting out how much change or how much a float does an institution need to put in at the start of the day to make sure that they can pay what they need to. We're speeding up those algorithms to make it a much more efficient use of their capital. So there are changes that we're bringing along, but there is we do need to keep evergreening it. We've got sort of the teams to do that. We've got the governance, but we haven't got perfect vision. But Nathan, do you want to say a bit more about how the modular approach can help us keep it real for longer?
Yeah, so part of the design is obviously that, whereas before it was like a big behemoth box basically, now we've got lots of different modules that we can swap out. So think of it as a platform which is going to constantly evolve and adapt, and we've got some big things like synchronization, which has big industry engagement, which is therefore like a big project, and we've got the kind of day-to-day operations, I call it the feeding and the watering that we need to do to make sure it stays in support and we stay on top of it. So we've got a team sized and scaled to be able to do the constant feeding and the watering, and then obviously we've got the team around to do the kind of more strategic kind of functional changes to the platform as well. But it will evolve over time. We've learned so much from operating it for over a year now as well. So there's constant kind of monitoring changes that we're doing, operational changes that we're doing, etc. So it is a live platform. We've made well over 1,000 changes to the platform since it's been live. We never would have been able to have done that with the old system. Just to test the old system used to take 3 months to do something called regression testing. We can do that now because we've automated the testing. We can do that overnight. So it makes it a very different platform to maintain and manage. Complex, don't get me wrong, but we've got lots of new controls in place. So, yeah, constantly evolving platform is the way to think about it in the future.
And just a couple of final comments from me. Actually, I took the risk the day after we went live last April of giving a speech sort of noting that we'd gone live, but also looking ahead absolutely to this notion of what we've provided is the platform that we're not just that innovation can be on, but we can help steer and drive that innovation. We've talked quite a bit about synchronization and how encouraging that is, because when you look at wholesale markets globally, although the paper has been digitized in them, the process of settlement is not digitalised, and there's real gains that you could make in terms of efficiency and speed of wholesale markets. I think there's also, back to your chartered surveyor role, this is why some of our proof of concepts have been around a housing transaction. There are so many legs. So we are just trying to make sure that we have that platform, which I think really will support innovation across the UK economy, and the UK is a global player here. I mean, one thing on the kind of cross-border agenda, for example, and more generally, having the Governor Andrew Bailey as chair of the Financial Stability Board, which has kind of been driving a lot of this with the G20. The G20 might have some political challenges at times, but having the real experts who want to see those improvements made in wholesale payments. And then for the UK, thinking more parochially, a key area of a key wholesale asset is obviously UK gilts. They are the risk-free asset of duration. We have reserves, but you've got UK gilts and their whole agenda with Digit as part of digitalising the UK wholesale market. A digital gilt. We're very, very keen to support that. They made some announcements actually about the procurement of that recently, which we were talking about earlier. I'm sure the NAO will be interested in that in time as a project, but it's in its infancy at the moment. But I mean that's got huge potential, I think, for the wider. Given the core role that gilts have as the risk-free asset for that digitalisation of UK wholesale markets, and we want to be, whether it's through RTGS or whether it's through our other systems and how they interact with gilts, part of the way forward there.
You went to the debt management office and saw one of their auctions. I can just begin to see where this is all going.
Yeah, exactly.
Golly. Rupert is going to do the final questions, but can I just say this to you? I'm in 12 years on this committee. I don't think that I've ever been involved in such a hearing where a digital transformation programme has been so successful. Clearly there are lots of lessons which we've tried to bring out this morning, but what can we all do together to help government actually produce these big transformational programs in some cases, not all of them, but we know of some very big ones at the moment. You mentioned NS&I. How can we provide a blueprint, if you like, so that some people can avoid the obvious mistakes?
Let me start on that, and I'm sure colleagues will have views. I mean, I think there are a lot of general lessons from this project, which and we've touched on all of them, which will have a read across. Obviously, there are some specifics and I've tried to emphasise. We're quite lucky in some ways in the Bank of England, given our size, given the focus. We do have a lot of capacity. But I'm sure the NAO, given your experience, will be very good at bringing out those general lessons, but also recognising differences. I guess we were very proud of the achievement of going live and it going well. And then we were thrilled to get a positive report card from the NAO. Of course, when the NAO writes a report that says, public sector digital change programme goes well, it doesn't tend to get the headlines that many of the NAO reports get. And so, we put out a low-key press conference, a press statement. But I think there's a lot more, and hopefully this hearing can help with that. But then the follow-up can help in terms of dissemination. I mean, reflecting on this as a former civil servant, if I was still a civil servant, I'd probably expect to be invited along to Wednesday morning colleagues, if it's still called that, when all the perm secs get together to just explain something that's worked. And, because I'm sure they have to talk about things that haven't. We're not as plugged into that world as a government department would be. I know that colleagues are taking part in a big NAO event in April. I think you two are taking part. If I can, I'll go along if that would be useful. But I think we have to look for every opportunity. I should stress we're already, thanks to the NAO, but I think they would have been in touch anyway. NS and I have been engaging very closely with Nathan and Victoria on, what can we learn from, because they're the ones who are obviously in flight at the moment. But, we want to, obviously we've got other things to do, but within reason we want to help NAO. The report, I was saying this to Simon and Yvonne in the break, the report is fantastic for many reasons, not just because it's nice about us, but also because it does a great job of synthesising what we did. I mean, some of the figures and tables, I was always kind of keen to get them whilst we were going along, and we never quite got there. So to have the NAO bring it all together and hopefully still warts and all is incredibly helpful, so that others can then see, okay, that does work for us. That doesn't quite. I think the NAO are probably the best place with you to come up with a blueprint.
Gareth, high praise indeed from the Bank of England. There you are.
I just wanted to add, I was going to mention, if Dave hadn't, the event we've lined up for April, where we've invited civil servants to understand more about the lessons here. But it's also the only report in my time that I've actually written to every permanent secretary with a copy of the report to draw it to their attention, and I've had replies back as well, people saying that they were going to use it within their teams. So we are going to make sure that these are disseminated fully.
Well done, thank you. Finally, not by no means least, Rupert Lowe.
Well, Chairman, thank you very much. I mean, you've been very active today, so I think I've still got a bit left to ask. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to hear the write-up that you were given by Yvonne and Simon in our briefing, and to hear you all appear to be so well over your brief. I'm tempted to say we should put you in a bag with most of the other public sector departments and shake you up and hope a bit of you rubs off on them, having sat around this table and listened to very different stories of less success than you appear to have achieved. I was interested, you went live in April 25, and have you had any hiccups or issues since then?
Will you start and I'll come in?
Yeah, we've had a few small issues, is what I'd say. We've still met all of our SLAs, so they're 99.99% of the time the system's been up and running. So like any new platform system, there's been some challenges. Like I say, they've been very kind of small in nature, and settlement has continued throughout the majority of that time as well. So actually we've learned a lot from the system going live. Every little event that we do have, we do kind of instant reviews on the back of, and we learn from again. So, but yeah, there has been a few interruptions, should we say, but nothing fundamental, and we've still hit the main primary SLA that we need to.
And the SLA is for a very high degree of availability. Victoria will probably be able to remind me, but it's something like 99.9. But we've had a few, there have been some instances. The good thing is we've always been able to learn from those and establish the root cause. I mean, my vantage point on this is that I'm chair of the RTGS Chaps Board, which oversees the operation of RTGS and Chaps. I mentioned earlier, we bought Chaps in-house at the end of 2017, just after I started. And at that point, I I've said the bank likes governance, so we made the governance more senior. So I run a board with, I think, 5 non-execs on it. All have a background in payments, and so they, the risk committee that has to explain to them when things have gone wrong. They will get an incident report if there's an incident. So I have I'm on the hook day to day from chairing that, and also, it so happens that Andrew, the governor, has a real background in the operations. So even if it's just a minor thing, he'll always want to know about it. I think the other thing I'd say is we've also had to deliver a lot of change over that period. So back to this evergreening, we've had to introduce all these upgrades during that period. Also, we had to deal with a backlog of defects that we decided we could postpone until we'd gone live. They weren't critical. That came out of that testing process that we talked about in the context of TS3 and TS4. So, I mean, you could I'm very pleased to be responsible and to be on the hook for our payment operations, but it does mean that you're only as good as how you've been that day.
The implementation's been pretty successful, other than a few bits and pieces.
Yeah.
So I was interested in the support, because in my experience of writing the kind of software that you need to do this, it's not just implementation, it's support. So I see you've got there's 125 people still on the project. I think you've got 32, Accenture have got 84 looking at this, PA Consulting 5 and contractors 4. So part of it is implementation. Are you confident that you've got the actual structuring of the support right? Yeah. Because in my experience, when you get involved in writing bespoke software, particularly with people like Accenture, if you're not careful, you end up running up a very big downstream bill. So my question is, have you got that covered off as far as the taxpayer is concerned?
I think we have. I mean, it has contributed to why, and this is rightly, you'd expect the NAO to point out that the running costs have gone up, because, I mean, it was a key part of the contract with Accenture that they would pass everything back to us to run. So we are not contracting out. And in fact, I think we're very close to Accenture's last person. Friday was the last involvement of Accenture. So as part of our increased running costs, we've had all the knowledge transfer from them back
to your staff.
To our staff. And that comes back to what I was saying to a comment from Mr. Osborne about we have had to change not just the RTGS target operating model, but the way the bank is staffed. We have to have these technology experts who can come, and they can, when we have one of these little, usually it's silent running, but when we have one of these and they're just dealing with the change, we'll have one of these instances, we'll get to the, what's happened, we'll be able to work out from the code why it happened, we can fix it, and we can also, back to the innovation agenda that we've been talking about with the chair, these are the people who are going to be enhancing the system.
If you need to innovate, you've got the skills in-house to do it. Well, that's great. So you're comfortable that you've got that covered off.
And that's
otherwise, in my experience, people do suffer huge downstream.
No, and we were very. I mean, but it's come at a cost in the sense of our target, our running. It's gone up from 21 million to 40 million, and you mentioned that in the report. That's buying us a lot more in-house technological capacity for this very critical.
But it's been a conscious decision, though. Right? And we embedded people in the Accenture team really early on, and we've grown that capability throughout the time as well. So
that's great. That's great. Yeah. So you say, and I understood you to say you discussed this with the users, because in your document, ultimately you mention charging for it for this system. So ultimately, as you know, the banks used to be accused, and I've often done it myself, accused of getting between the wall and the wallpaper, in that it took a long time to get your money to go from A to B, and very often they were sitting on the money. So have you, if you're going to start charging the users for this, is that the banks or is that the people who are actually making the transfers? Are the banks less able to get between the wall and the wallpaper with your new system than they were before?
Victoria can give you the chapter and verse on who pays the RTGS and CHAPS levy. but it's the same people paying it now as paying it before. We've changed, as the report points out, the fee structure to allow for those who are very significant users relative to those who aren't. Everyone, though, is having to pay for the renewal of the system on a 20-year payback. We decided, we thought that was reasonable given how much of a leap forward this is. We thought it was reasonable to claw that back over 20 years. Obviously, as we increase access to the system, and that goes back to one of the 5 key priorities in the blueprint, we're going to have more and more interesting people who are using and paying. So, we've got our first omnibus account with Finality. We've got more and more non-bank payment system providers. But of course, they will then pass it on to their end customers. So, I'm not sure how it works with your analogy.
Charging is transparent.
Charging is transparent.
Charging, and then everybody knows what they're dealing with, and then people can see what the frictional costs of making a transfer are. Because if we're trying to collectively help British industry or British commerce or British trade generally, we want a system that is transparent, that does actually serve the end user and not just enrich the banking system, who arguably are the parasites on the back of the productive animal.
So the costs to RT, they get spread between the key users. So some of the CHAPS direct participants, who we will charge the individual direct participants there. Another chunk is paid for Crest, security settlement system. Mm-hmm. Other chunks are paid for by the retail systems and Visa. So different organisations pay different chunks. For the CHAPS direct participants, they would then pass that cost on to their customers. But as Dave said, one of the things that we've been trying to do around the whole access regime is to bring in new players, and that came first of all with a policy change. So we were the first G7 central bank to enable non-bank payment service providers to have direct access to our TGS, and then as part of the Renewal programme, we've been increasing the capacity for more players and also looking to streamline the onboarding process. So the idea is that will enable more of the smaller players, the non-bank payment service providers, to come to us direct. So they are taking out one of those middle banks, so to speak, and to get a bit more competition, which should ultimately enhance
that sounds
customers.
Great. So next question. Can you commercialise this yourselves and actually turn it into something you sell to other countries or other people who might use it and defray the cost of it even more, or is that something you want to keep as a proprietary?
Well, yeah, we certainly wouldn't. I mean, back to the kind of original security considerations, there's no way we're going to commercialise directly the core settlement engine. That had to be built under the tightest, no one's got access to that code, what you were hearing about, even up in Accenture in Newcastle. So, however, banks central banks are pretty, I take quite a high priority the security of RTGS, but also of access to our balance sheet. What we are doing, though, is through the work we were talking about through the FSB cross-border, where we can share lessons of how our technological solution has worked with other countries, some of whom might be going down more of a wholesale digital currency route than we are, or we're all working at different speeds in that sense, and we can share, and then we can improve our accessibility through ours and stuff to break down the barriers that way. So I would argue it was that way rather than, and more generally, we typically don't think of ourselves as commercialising what we provide as a central bank.
You've got Accenture bolted down from an intellectual property point of view.
It's our IP. We
Totally.
own it. Yeah.
You've got that absolutely bolted down.
They can go around and say, we've got a track record of delivery. Look what we did for the Bank of England, but we've got them bolted down on IP.
And I've got two other questions, really, just from my interest. The first one was this in any way driven by the advent of central bank digital currencies? Because I know the governor is quite keen on them, as was certainly Rishi Sunak. I'm less keen on them, but was that any motivation for this development? Because you did say that the old systems actually were clunky but functional.
I mean, what you've got to distinguish between is money and the rails on which money operates. I mean, and I would argue that the bank, including Andrew Bailey, the governor, we want to make sure that we have the best technological solution that ensures the singleness of money. And for me, that comes back to, the money that's either created on our balance sheet, electronic money, or notes. CBDC is one option. Retail CBDC as a different type of money, but that's very distinct from the rails that money is operating on, and that's where I would argue everything we've talked about today, how money and assets are settled. But I would describe us as, we're still in the design phase with the Treasury. We've got to make a decision, I think, this year on our retail CBDC. Equally, we are really pushing hard on stablecoin, which is where the US is going. But again, that comes back to making sure that the bank's balance sheet and operations, if a sterling stablecoin came along, as opposed to a digital pound, could we deal with that? Would that meet our standard of singleness of money, along with the commercial bank money or notes? So, and that world has got more complicated even since we introduced the thinking on the digital pound. So I think this is all very much in flux, and we are just trying to make sure that we are providing both the infrastructure and the technological platform that innovation can take place on, and let's see what form that takes. Whereas clearly when you look at the ECB, they're much more going down the retail. They've gone much further on retail CBDC. The digital euro. We're still at the design phase.
And my final question, again, just reading the document and thinking about this, have you any thoughts about how the rapid development of AI is likely to affect what you're doing? Because it strikes me that the software industry is actually very much at risk from AI, which is, whereas it was probably quite inaccurate a year ago, it's still vaguely inaccurate, but probably in a year's time it's going to be very accurate. How do you see that affecting your operations?
Given that Nathan is, our CIO and has got to think about how that, that part of it, how AI might, if you like, how it might impact on the labour inputs, as it were, and how coding is done. Just to reassure you, I mean, as part of narrowly and then more generally, on RT, one thing that we get with RT is a much bigger capability to analyse data. So we've now got the capacity through the new system to ingest vast quantities of payments data that we can then look for patterns. And you can easily imagine how and other central banks have done this, that an AI application would be looking for an outlier payment that might tell you something, either that there's a problem with the payment. That could be because there was something dodgy about it, or there was something interesting about it economically. So being able to use kind of machine learning techniques analytically, it's something we need to make more progress on now that we've got. But that is one example of an analytical application. More generally across the bank, as I'm sure you're aware, we've got like every institution, we have to have an AI strategy. We're thinking about how it could impact on everything that we're doing. But do you want to say something about just from your business area?
Yeah. So like Dave said, we've been really focused on the AI strategy, the policy, ethics framework, all that kind of stuff, which is in place. And we've got a lot of experiments that are going on. I think it's fair to say they break down into kind of productivity type areas, or then to Dave's point about use cases that we've got for more analytical purposes. We're already exploring on the actual platform that we've built about how our AI ops can help us, give us insight into incidents and that type of stuff. So I'd say watch this space. It's something we are working on, but then it gives us a big data set to kind of play with, basically. So we've got a lot that we could be doing here. We are exploring quite a lot at the moment already. So, but that's more of an enterprise-wide as well as specifically for RT as well.
But we are thinking about how it could impact on every part of our workforce, whether that's coders, people doing policy analysis, could MPC members in future be replaced by, agents?
Very definitely.
Right.
Okay, well,
very
thank you
last
very
question. Very last question. My able deputy Clive Betts, please.
Right, so this is an example for the rest of the government to follow. So gone all round to permanent secretaries, and they're looking now saying, off we go, we're going to follow it. The problem is it took 9 years. And most of them would probably say, well, actually, politically, whether it's welfare reform, NHS reform, we need it much more quickly than that. Are there any lessons you can learn about how things might have been done more quickly in hindsight?
Or how we could have shortened the 9 years.
And still got it right?
I think we, maybe if we had spent less time at the outset thinking about the fit for the future, if we de-scoped that and really focused on everything else, we might have saved a small amount of time. But to be honest, I think I realise the 9 years is going to be very challenging with perm secs or with CEOs, but I think you can break. This is why I think the report is so good. You can break it all down into the constituent parts, and if you look at, and I wouldn't be able to mention them, but your NAO team would. If you look at the big problems that other schemes have had, for example, not spending enough time on that planning, analysis and design stage. So I'm saying if we'd maybe de-scoped in that stage, we could have saved a few months. But that's that's just my hunch. I might be wrong on that. But actually, the fact that we spent time on that was money incredibly well spent and time well spent. And then we went into the procurement with a clear sight as to what we wanted, what the technical requirements are. I think these are lessons that, if not lessons, then back to your idea of producing a sort of blueprint or guide. I mean, I've read some of the NAO reports. You've already got them. I think what we can give is an example of where it does apply to one of the NAO's lessons. You've got lots of lessons where it hasn't worked. We can say it did work. It didn't work in every case with us. And I do want to stress that, to your point, Mr. Betts, we're not government. We're not constrained by the political cycle. But and we did have a system that was still operating.
That's really important.
And that is, and so making sure, particularly, I mean, I look at NS&I, and as they told you, they've got 25 million customers, including you, as you said, me with my app. The app may not do very much, but it does do the basics. We don't have any of that to worry about. So they're keeping their service going. Their net financing went up. So they're doing other things for the government as well as... so you've got to always bear in mind that context. But I think there are some real lessons from the different phases of what worked for us that we talked about today.
Thank you.
I was just going to add, though, it's I know it's 9 years in duration, but we delivered in phases as well. So, we delivered within the 4 or 5 years, and then we've had different releases on the back of that as well. So, total 9 years, but we've been delivering benefit before that, if that makes sense.
There's some reforms in some systems where you could actually gain some benefit as you go along.
Incremental benefit has been delivered throughout the 9 years.
The biggest point I would make would be take time on that, what we call the PAD phase, planning, analysis and design. And it's set out really well in I think it's figure 2 of the report. You've got that very clear timeline, and I think within each of those you've got the lessons we've talked about today from PAD, from procurement, and then from delivery. So then you can then map that across, as NAO would do, to where's that common with another transformation, what would work, what wouldn't in a different context. And I think there's just as we learnt from our own challenges in the past, and I'm sure we would learn from others, that I'm sure there are bits we could have learnt from the rest, from government, that we could have done better too.
I think
Okay.
it's sort of.
Oh.
I think. Sorry, the one thing I was going to say.
Victoria
Sorry, was
should
it's-
have the last word.
I mean, this was a big critical national infrastructure programme. There are other things, we'll take these lessons in the bank, and there'll be things we'll be delivering a lot more quickly. I think it's picking the bits that are most relevant to particular programmes, just thinking, is the governance right for you? You probably don't need something as complicated as RT for everything, but sometimes you do. And also this report, which is really great, it makes it look as if we're a swan. There was a lot of sort of foot paddling underneath, so I don't want anyone to go away and think this was easy. There was a lot of work from a lot of people to get there.
The swan rather than the ugly ducklings that we often have in this committee.
Can I thank all three of you very much? I mean, it's a real pleasure to have had you in front of us to see a project that's been so successful. One of the most complicated projects we've come across, yet it's successful. So can I thank you hugely for delivering such a successful project. And we will certainly be doing all we can to publicise your successes. So I know you're all very busy people, but thank you very much indeed. So an uncorrected version of the transcript will be available in the coming days, following which we will produce a report with recommendations, which I hope you will look at. And then we will do our best to, depending on the answers to those recommendations, do our best to publicise your success. But thank you very much indeed. Order, order.